In early September 1939, Hitler invaded Poland. On the 10th of May 1940, he invaded France, and on the 22nd of June 1941, he invaded the USSR. So that's a period of nearly 2 years in which Hitler and the Nazis went on a very strong offensive against territories in mainland Europe. He started with Western Europe, with Poland, the Low Countries, and then France, and then moved on to the Soviet Union. By September 1941, it was very clear to anybody watching that Hitler was going to be defeated. But in the first instance, particularly when he attacked France, but previously when the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact saw the abolition, really, of Poland and the destruction of Poland. I'm reading about it at the moment, and I'm reading how a book called The Devil's Alliance, an excellent book. It's a very long book and very dense, but it's a really, really well-written book. Very clear and very easy to follow. Poland was obliterated by both the Soviet Union and by the Nazis, and it's hard to know which part of Poland suffered worse. It's hard to know. Okay, the Jews in German-occupied Poland obviously were going to suffer very badly in the long term, but in terms of poverty and tyranny, in terms of barbarity, the Soviet-occupied part of Poland suffered terribly as well. So these offensives that started from September of 1939, leading all the way up to June of 1941, had terrible psychic effect on people. This is similar, more similar than is being acknowledged broadly, even out here in the alternative scene. It's similar to what's happening with COVID-19. The launch of the lockdowns in countries like Britain, Ireland, other countries, Spain, Italy, and so on, that happened this year, really from the end of February of this year onwards. And it had a profound psychic impact on very many people. It did not have it on me because I knew what to expect. I knew what to expect. Had I had a small business, had I been reliant on an income, it could have been a very different situation. So I cannot be smug about it. But the reality is that it's been a long time since I trusted our government. In any event, we are now beginning to see a growing resistance. And I do draw that comparison with such things as the Polish underground resistance and the French underground resistance, who ultimately would contribute significantly to the defeat of Hitler. Now, what contributed very significantly to the defeat of Hitler was the invasion of the Soviet Union. That was not his wisest move. Nobody has ever conquered Russia and the other countries peripheral to Russia, which formed the Soviet Union. Nobody has ever conquered them from the West. The only people who conquered them came from the East, and they were Genghis Khan and the Mongols. And they did that because they were used to even harsher conditions than the Russians. They knew what they were doing, the Mongols did. I do believe that the medieval image of the devil on horseback came from the Mongols. I believe that inspired that cult image of the devil on horseback. These men on horseback came and laid waste to anybody who wouldn't surrender to them. The Mongols are actually quite tolerant. If cities were willing to surrender to the Mongols and just to let them take over, they left them alone. But if they didn't surrender to the Mongols or accept their supremacy, they laid waste to the place. This is a digression. But the mood is different now, and the morale is somewhat different now from earlier this year, February, March, April, May of this year. That's not really the point of this particular video. The point of this particular video is RTE, once again, and the conduct of RTE in all of this. Until last year, and I've said this in many videos before, I would have been inclined, reluctantly and with a raised eyebrow, to have given RTE a break. Because, as I said before, one must accept that people working in newsrooms, in newspapers and in broadcast media are under a lot of pressure. Accuracy can sometimes take a back seat to sheer expediency of time and money. I understand that. I know what it's like to be stuck for time. I most certainly know what it's like to be stuck for money. I actually understand what it's like to be in those circumstances. And newsrooms, the money isn't there anymore. Online media has eviscerated mainstream media. That was happening anyway. But as I said before, when I spotted that RTE were lying on behalf of Varadkar's smear of 4 whistleblowing doctors, that for me was a critical moment. That was the red pill for me. That was when, like, Winston found the photograph of Jones, Aronson and Rutherford in 1984. He realised that there were verifiable lies being told. And last year with the whistleblowing doctors and RTE, that's when I said RTE aren't just inaccurate here or making mistakes. RTE are telling lies. That completely woke me up to RTE then. This gets on then to this year. RTE relies upon a number of things to survive. Despite all of that, it is still insolvent. And I don't mean that it's just failing to balance the books, which it is. It is failing to balance the books, but that's been a long old story there. I mean, RTE is now on the brink of having its electricity and its gas or whatever cut off from them because they are actually financially insolvent in RTE. That is not my problem, and it does not worry me. I think I'm not alone in that sentiment. But RTE relies on 2 legitimate sources of funding, and I use legitimate in the sense of them being legal and constitutional. The first is the licence fee, the second is advertising. Now, for a state broadcaster to rely on both a licence fee and broadcast and advertising is open to debate. So we take the BBC. The BBC, by charter, is prevented from taking advertising. It's one of the strong points of the BBC, actually, and I refuse to lump the BBC in with RTE. Okay, there are many problems at the BBC, and there are many different problems at the BBC. You look at Jimmy Savile, for example. But nobody can deny that the BBC has a long archive and repertoire of quality programming and of being considerably diverse. And there was a time when the BBC were very courageous. I think a lot of that has ended. But the BBC is a legacy that RTE quite simply never had. RTE relies legitimately and lawfully and constitutionally upon the licence fee and upon advertising revenue. But there's something else that RTE has been getting. And that, I think, is much more questionable. They have been getting direct subsidy from the government. That is structurally, legally different from the licence fee. So, for example, prior to Christmas of this year, prior to the election, they got an extra subvention from the government, just a direct cheque for 10 million. An announcement has come out lately that they're getting another 50 million. That is bad enough, but it's worse then when one looks at how, when the COVID-19 hoax started this year, Varadkar, anytime he wanted to make a speech, RTE closed the airwaves for him. He was ostensibly it was part of the news broadcast, but in effect, it was allowing Varadkar to command the airwaves in the way that the US president would. The President of Ireland has a constitutional right to make an announcement over the airwaves. That is, to order that all of the non-pirate broadcasters in the state give him or her a certain amount of time to make an announcement. But that would be in time of a national emergency, by which I mean it's the equivalent of, say, a nuclear strike or a tsunami or some kind of major environmental disaster. But what Varadkar was doing with these various different speeches he would make, ostensibly on the 6-1 News, was having the same effect as presidential broadcasts. This then must be seen in the context of RTE getting direct subvention from the government, as I already explained, 10 million and 50 million. This has not really pricked the conscience of the alternatives very much, but it struck me very strongly at the time that it was wrong. And I would go further, and I would go and this is something that I say with a lot of consideration, I would go to say that there's a constitutional issue here. What we have is a Taoiseach, in the case of Varadkar, who is an authoritarian narcissistic sociopath. He's also, as we've established earlier, a criminal. Or at least, to be somewhat more judicious with what I'm saying, he has questions to answer in a criminal context. Yet, since the coronavirus thing started, and after the general election, I hasten to add, though that's actually not legally relevant, anytime Varadkar wanted to make one of his particularly narcissistic and fantastic and fantasist-based speeches, he would be given that opportunity ostensibly on the 6-1 news, or maybe the 9 o'clock news on RTE. So this would have the effect on the populace of the equivalent of a presidential address. Yet Varadkar is not the president. That thought has probably slipped his mind. Some time ago, shortly into his disastrous tenure as Taoiseach, he referred to himself as the head of the Dáil. He was corrected in that regard by the Ceann Comhairle, who said that the head of the Dáil is the Ceann Comhairle. That's correct, but Varadkar has always shown an alarming disregard and ignorance of boundaries, including constitutional boundaries. The man is a narcissistic fantasist. That's not meant in any complimentary way. By a fantasist, it's meant that he does not have a grip on reality. This has been evident to anybody who's objectively been assessing Varadkar from even before his becoming Taoiseach. He is a fantasist. That means, in the broadest sense, and it does apply to Varadkar, that truth and reality do not trouble him. That is said seriously, that's said earnestly. Fantasists are not worried with truth and reality. They just make up the story as they go along, and then when they're inevitably confounded by the truth, they just continue to lie. That is a feature of narcissism, of course it's a feature of psychopathology, but it's also a specific and more narrow feature of being a fantasist, and Varadkar is a fantasist. So his behaviour in Downing Street, talking about Love Actually, that's the behaviour of a fantasist. And concomitant to being a fantasist is grandiosity, and Varadkar is extremely grandiose. That's again not said as a compliment. Grandiosity means having a notion of one's importance and one's stature and one's relevance that is actually not weighted in reality. When one actually assesses Varadkar, his vocabulary is that of a 12-year-old. It's sophomoric, it's vulgar, it's crude. This is shown in his tweets. The tweets are much closer to the real person. When Varadkar strays off script, which fantasists do, his language again is that sophomoric, juvenile language of a 12-year-old. I'd go further, I'd say a 9-year-old. And his behaviour is that as well. And in one of his interminable speeches, he made a reference to a film, Mean Girls. In another speech, which Doireann Garrahy said had moved her to tears, she bawled her way through Leo's speech, she tweeted. Bawled my way through Leo's speech, such leadership, empathy and strength. That was a tweet Doireann Garrahy put up. In that particular speech, Varadkar said, not all heroes wear capes. Now, that's an insult. Because in a situation as serious as COVID-19 and the terrible privations that people have been suffering, for Varadkar to use references to B-movies, really, is an insult. His then later reference to Mean Girls, which he was forced to admit was done on some kind of a bet, is very similar to the behaviour of the characters in The Wolf of Wall Street. They're mocking the people who they're speaking to. Varadkar then was photographed in the Phoenix Park. We don't need to go into too many details about the nature of the photograph. But again, that's a mockery. That's not accidental. That's an attitude. Now, we can continue to harp on about the fact that RTE don't report that. Yes, we know that. RTE don't report it. Yes, I think we're seeing a shift in the general mainstream consciousness this weekend where people are saying, hang on, RTE is not giving us the story here. As an aside, it could be said, Now Varadkar has been exposed a second time, being involved in corruption, doing corrupt acts, and abusing his position, his political position, to pursue a corrupt act. RTE has a terrible choice here. Either they can be truthful about what has happened, and they can lose the support of Fine Gael and all of those golden handshakes they've been getting, or they can continue to do what they are, what is apparent from initially with this particular situation. They're lying, they're sanitizing the affair, and they're trying to get people to move on. This is precisely what they did with the 81 golfers. Precisely what they did with the 81 golfers. So this is their form. It looks, all signs show that RTE is reverting to form, but it seems that the mainstream public, those who are paying the licence fee, are not so amenable to it now. Even as amenable as they would have been, say, back around the Golfgate thing of August or thereabouts. Times have changed. Times are changing, and they're changing fast. I've put up many videos and memes on social media in the past talking about November 2020. Well, here we are. It's now the 2nd of November. We've gone past midnight. Times have changed. Times have changed. And, you know, Bill Clinton, it's his wife who I'd be more concerned about, but Bill Clinton had a slogan in 1992 when he ran an excellent campaign. That was the last time a sitting US president got unseated 28 years ago. Whatever the mainstream media might be telling us about Biden, I think that there's next to zero chance of Biden unseating Trump. Trump is an incumbent. The people who voted for him before will vote again. And Biden is not even an impressive character. Ironically, Clinton would have a better chance of unseating him this time if she'd had another stab at it. But people are sick of her. I've digressed. To get back to RTE, they now are facing... Sorry, to get back to Bill Clinton. Sorry, I've rambled here a bit. Many apologies. Clinton's key slogan in the 1992 US presidential election was, "It's the economy, stupid." Yeah, he was right. Very good slogan. It's a slogan that actually really was a clever slogan by Bill Clinton. It's the economy, stupid. And that was, you know, hit the nail on the head. It was perfect. It was a very, very cogent evaluation of what matters. And what we're watching in Ireland is the economy, stupid. And Bill Clinton was very questionable, particularly in his sexual behaviour. But people liked him. And I can understand why people liked him in a way they didn't like his wife. And it's not to do with, it's not the sexist man-woman thing. Forget that. It's to do with the fact that Clinton had a certain charisma that people could relate to. His wife never had it. People didn't like her. She was Lisa Simpson grown big. Bill Clinton, the Americans liked Clinton. They liked Bill. They liked Bill. And I can get the pick. I can understand why. It's understandable. There was a certain thing Bill had. People described meeting Bill around Enniskillen or when he'd visit Ireland. And I remember talking to a woman, and she worked in Gateway in Dublin, and Bill came to visit Gateway. And she said, he was the sexiest man she'd ever met. And she said that in front of her boyfriend. I remember that. She said it in front of her boyfriend, that Bill Clinton was the sexiest man she'd ever met. Bill was sexy, I understand that. I don't think that word could ever correlate with Hillary. But it is the economy, stupid. And the Irish economy is now in a dreadful state. In a dreadful state. And that's going to dictate more than anyone in our... There's my phone. Somebody sent me an email. That's going to dictate more than anyone in RTE or the Irish Times or any of that gang, that horrible, horrible venal inner circle who have caused so much hurt and damage. How have they caused so much hurt and damage? Because until very recently, the mainstream media, and it's a bigger group than just RTE and the Irish Times, but it's easy to focus on those two, RTE and the Irish Times, yes. RTE and the Irish Times had an inner track on the Irish psyche. Educated people trusted the Irish Times. Educated people, I didn't. But educated people tended to trust RTE. I always found the programming dull as dishwater. I never enjoyed watching stuff on RTE, really, most of the time. Sometimes they could. The very, very odd time they could have quite good stuff. But even as a kid, I always found RTE dull as dishwater. But this is changing. And now we see more evidence that Varadkar is a crook. And I use that word in its fullest sense. I hope he hears this video, and I challenge him to sue me for defamation. He's corrupt and he's a crook. Varadkar is. There, I've said it. He can sue me. He is corrupt and he is a crook. And unfortunately now the apologies and the statements and the answering to the Dáil. Oh, yes, yes, we'll get him in to answer to the Dáil. Yeah, that should do it. No. He should be answering to a judge and jury.